Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today I'm making video on the topic of the Abgs. Previously I made a video on the Abgs, but the quality of that video was not very good. So in Abgs we already know that the normal values, the reference pH we know that 7.40, that is, and the range is 7.35 to 7.45. The CO2 we are having, the reference range is take 40 and the normal range is 35 to 45. So in formula, if we have to use a single number, we have to use this reference value, and we are having bicarbonate reference value is 24 while reference range is 22 to 28. Now coming quickly to the topic, that is, we have to look two things, the CO2 and the bicarbonate. So if one thing is normal, point number one, if one thing is normal, either CO2 or bicarbonate, by normal I mean if that is in the range and the other is moving up or down, then that is very simple to pick. Like for example, say CO2 is normal and the bicarbonate is going up. What is this condition called? Metabolic alkalosis. CO2 is normal and the bicarbonate is going down. What is this condition called? Metabolic acidosis, because HCO3 is alkali. If it is increasing, it will cause alkalosis, and since it is metabolic component, so it is metabolic alkalosis. If the bicarbonate is decreasing, it is metabolic acidosis. That is very simple to pick. Again, if bicarbonate is normal and the CO2 is moving up or down, if the CO2 is moving up, we know that CO2 is acid. If the acid is moving up, it means this is acidosis, and this is respiratory component, so it is respiratory acidosis. And if the bicarbonate within the normal range and the CO2 is moving down, then this condition is called what? If the CO2 is going down, CO2 acts like acid. If acid is decreasing in the blood, it means alkalosis. But CO2 is a respiratory component, so it is respiratory alkalosis. So it's very simple. If one thing is within the normal range and the other thing is moving up or down, we can diagnose it very quickly. That was the first setup. Second setup is both are moving in the opposite direction. This is CO2, this is HCO3. CO2 is moving up and bicarbonate is moving down. This is which condition? If both are moving in the opposite direction, again this is very simple to pick. If both the arrows are opposite, this is a mixed acid base disorder. Mixed acid base disorder. This is mixed acid base disorder. If both arrows are moving in opposite direction. Now CO2 is increasing, bicarbonate is decreasing. This is which condition? CO2 is acid. It will cause respiratory acidosis and it will cause metabolic acidosis. Both are causing acidosis. So this is mixed acidosis. Now if the CO2 is coming down, CO2 is coming down and the bicarbonate is increasing. This is which condition? CO2 decrease causes alkalosis and bicarbonate also causes alkalosis. So this is mixed alkalosis. Mixed alkalosis. This is again very easy to pick. Now the problem is when both the arrows are moving either upward or downward. That is the problem. Till now we have discussed two things. If one thing is normal and the other is moving up or down, very easy. Another setup we discussed, both the arrows are moving in opposite direction. Again, that is very easy to pick. The problem is when both the arrows are moving either upward or downward. Now let's suppose CO2 is moving upward, bicarb is also moving upward, or CO2 is moving downward and bicarb is also moving downward. Now this is the problem. We will discuss this in detail. Suppose both are moving upward. Now in this, one arrow is the problem, the other arrow is either the problem or compensation. So which arrow is the problem? Which arrow is the problem? We have to look at the pH. For the confirmation of which arrow is the problem, we have to look at the pH. And now, after we have diagnosed which arrow is the problem, how will we find the other arrow? Whether there is the problem too or there is compensation? Formulas. Formulas on what? On problem arrow. This is the basic concept. If both the arrows are moving upward or both the arrows are moving downward, we have to find out which arrow is the problem arrow and which arrow is the compensation arrow. Or I repeat, which arrow is the problem arrow and the other arrow is either compensation or that is the problem too. Yeah. And we have to look at the pH. Now I'm discussing this in detail. If both the arrows are moving upward and the pH if both the arrows are moving upward and the pH is acidotic, that is less than 7.40. Now which arrow is the problem? This is CO2, this is bicarbonate. The increase in which causes acidosis? The increase in CO2 causes acidosis or the increase in bicarbonate causes acidosis? Of course, that is increase in CO2. So the problem arrow over here is you have to look at the pH. pH is acidotic. Now which thing causes acidosis? Increase in bicarbonate causes alkalosis. The pH was supposed to be alkalotic, but that is CO2 that is running the pH. So this is the problem arrow. So this is respiratory acidosis. Now the other arrow is either the compensation or the problem. How will we find that? Apply formula. So what is the formula for respiratory acidosis? We have to find out the expected bicarbonate. Now respiratory acidosis are of two types, acute and chronic. Before applying formula for respiratory acidosis, we have to find out whether this is acute or chronic. It is said if the problem is less than 48 hours, this is acute. We must know about the chronicity in order to apply the formula, because for acute respiratory acidosis formula is different, for chronic respiratory acidosis formula is different. If it is more than 48 hours, this is chronic respiratory acidosis. This is chronic respiratory acidosis. Now we are having no history. If we were having history, we would be able to apply the formula and we would be able to find out the expected bicarbonate. Now what is the example of acute respiratory acidosis? Opioid poisoning causes respiratory depression. Acute exacerbation of asthma. Of course the patient is having asthma, but acute exacerbation, that is less than 48 hours. Now what is the example of chronic? COPD, chronic respiratory acidosis. So you must pay attention on the history. So for respiratory acidosis, we are having compensation formulas. for respiratory acidosis. For acute and chronic, that is very simple. Suppose this is CO2 and this is bicarbonate. So this is 10, 10, 10, 10. The bicarbonate is 1, 2, 4, 5. This is for acute respiratory acidosis. This is for acute respiratory alkalosis. This is for chronic respiratory acidosis. This is for chronic respiratory alkalosis. So now we're here. For every 10 mm increase in CO2, of course in respiratory acidosis CO2 increases. For every 10 mm increase in CO2, bicarb increases by 1. In acute respiratory alkalosis, for every, of course in respiratory alkalosis the CO2 decreases. For every 10 mm decrease in CO2, bicarbonate should be decreased by 2. For chronic respiratory acidosis, for every 10 mm increase in CO2, bicarb should increase by 4. For chronic respiratory alkalosis, for every 10 mm decrease in CO2, because in alkalosis CO2 is decreasing, the bicarbonate decrease by 5. So this arrow, now we are looking for whether this is compensation or this is the problem. HCO3 is equal to or less than expected bicarbonate. This is compensation. This is compensation. Like for example, say my bicarbonate is this is bicarbonate that is present in the Abgs. Like for example, say that is my bicarbonate is 42 and the expected bicarbonate is 46. So that is less than that. So it means this is compensation. And now if the expected bicarbonate according to the formula we discussed, whether it was acute or chronic depending upon that condition, if it was acute the expected bicarbonate would be increased by 1. If it was chronic the expected bicarbonate would increase by 4. So if the measured bicarbonate is 42 and the expected bicarbonate is 36, that is measured bicarbonate is more than the expected bicarbonate, so there is concomitant metabolic alkalosis. So there is concomitant metabolic alkalosis. So we are having another condition, that is measured bicarb is more than expected bicarb. Now if this condition applies, this is secondary metabolic alkalosis. I think I'm clear up to this. We will discuss example later on so that you will be able to pick how compensation occurs. Both the arrows are moving upward and the pH is alkalotic, that is more than 7.40. Now which arrow is the problem and which arrow is the compensation? If there was increase in CO2 that will decrease the pH, but the pH is increased, it means this arrow is the problem arrow. So it means this is metabolic alkalosis. Now this arrow is the problem on compensation. We have to apply formula. And what is that formula for metabolic alkalosis? That is 0.7 into increase in bicarbonate plus 40. This is the expected CO2. This is expected CO2. Now again, that is the increase in bicarb, not the bicarb. It is the increase in bicarbonate level, not the bicarbonate. We have to subtract 24 from whatever value is given in the Abgs. So that is the expected CO2. Now the measured CO2, if the measured CO2 is equal to expected CO2, if the measured CO2 is equal to or less than, and this is compensation. The second arrow is the compensation. If the measured CO2 is more than expected, if the measured CO2 is more than expected, what is this? Secondary respiratory acidosis. Secondary respiratory acidosis. So the problem is there when both arrows are moving upward. To find out the problem arrow, we have to look at the pH, and to find out the other arrow, whether there is the problem or compensation, we have to apply the formula, and we have to find out the expected value. If the measured value coincides with the expected value, if the measured value is less than or equal to the expected value, this is compensation. If the measured value is more than the expected, then there is a secondary metabolic or respiratory disorder. If both the arrows are moving downward and the pH is acidotic, now which one is causing decrease in pH? Decrease in CO2? No. Decrease in bicarb? Yes. So this is the problem. This arrow is the problem, and this is called metabolic acidosis. And this is very important topic regarding the management of the patient and regarding the MCQs. Now this arrow is either the problem or compensation. How we know? Apply a formula, and the formula is 1.5 into bicarbonate plus 8 plus minus 2. This is for expected CO2. This is for expected CO2, and it will give you a range. If the CO2 lies within the range, expected CO2, you have to calculate from this formula a range, and now you have to compare the CO2 that is given in the Abgs to the expected CO2. If the CO2 lies within the range, this is the CO2 from Abgs or the question that is given. So lies in the range, this is compensation. If the CO2 comes out of the range, but it is on the high level, more than the upper limit of the range, then there is metabolic acidosis along with respiratory acidosis. So there is respiratory acidosis, and CO2 is less than the lower limit of the range, then this is respiratory alkalosis. So this is very important. Both the arrows are moving downward. pH is acidotic. This is metabolic acidosis. This is the problem arrow. Other arrow is either compensation or the problem. Apply formula. We are having range, like for example, say you are having 27 to 32 range. That is the expected CO2, and your value in Abgs is 34. Now this comes out of the range and more than the upper limit of normal, so there is respiratory acidosis. And if this value lies within the range, like for example say 30, then this is compensation. And if this value is less than 27, like for example say 25, there is a respiratory alkalosis along with metabolic acidosis. Another is if both the arrows are moving downward and the pH is alkalotic. Now this one is alkalotic. Now if this is alkalotic, which one is causing this decrease in CO2 or decrease in bicarb? Decrease in bicarb causes acidosis. It is actually decrease in CO2. So the problem arrow will be respiratory alkalosis. This will be a problem arrow, and that will be both arrows are moving downward, pH is alkalotic. The problem is respiratory alkalosis. Problem is respiratory alkalosis because the pH is alkalotic. The decrease in bicarb will cause acidosis. pH will be on acidotic side. So this is respiratory alkalosis, and for respiratory alkalosis again we need history, whether this is acute or chronic. Whether this is acute or chronic. So apply the formula we already discussed. For acute respiratory alkalosis, measure the value. The decrease in 10 mm CO2 would decrease bicarbonate by 2. And for chronic respiratory alkalosis, the decrease, of course this is alkalosis, CO2 would be decrease of 10 mm CO2 would decrease the bicarbonate by 5 mm. So you measure the expected value from that, and if the expected bicarbonate is equal to the measured, that is in the Abgs, then this is compensation, and if it is less than that, then there is concomitant metabolic acidosis.